Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on guiding you through your sustainability journey. We are going to wait a few minutes while more participants join up, so give a bit of time for people to register, and then we will kick off on the program. I'm noticing that people are still joining, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time, a minute or two before we move ahead. So hi to everyone who's just joined recently. We're just giving a few minutes because there's a lot of individuals joining at the moment. So we're going to give a couple of minutes before we get going, giving a chance for everyone to benefit from the whole webinar. So. Okay. Probably a good idea for us to get going now. So I'm going to cover the start of the webinar and then move on to my colleague Iris here. For those of you who are listening, I suggest you put yourself on mute so that we don't have any echo behind. Great. So thanks very much for everyone for joining us today on this webinar, where we're hoping to start with a program of how we're going to help organizations by helping guide them through their sustainability journey. Can we have the next slide? So, hi everyone. It's good morning, good evening, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the webinar here today. My name is Allchurch, and I'm the Chief of Outreach and Engagement at the UN Global Compact. And I'm joined here with Iris van der Veken, who is the Executive Director, I'm sure many of you know, of the Responsible Jewellery Council. We're both together on the very first of our webinar series, and it's the beginning of the action on our partnership between the UN Global Compact and the Responsible Jewellery Council. The Responsible Jewellery Council, through its code of practices, has made an extremely strong commitment to implement the Global Compact principles and work together to deliver the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we're delighted to be working together and are happy to kick off this very first webinar. Next slide. Throughout the webinar, you may have some questions and thoughts and ideas, and we will ensure there's plenty of time at the end of this session to shape some debate and to answer some questions. So use the button at the bottom here to add your questions. We'll tackle them all at the end, and any that we can't answer, we will definitely follow up with deeper and further information if needed. So firstly, a little bit of background about the Compact, for those of you who may not know. The Global Compact was launched 20 years ago by Kofi Annan when he launched his Millennium Development Goal targets, and he started with reaching out to the private sector. 40 companies joined him, and they established a set of principles which cover labor, human rights, anti-corruption, and the environment. And these principles are all based on UN conventions and UN declarations, signed off obviously by all member states. They create a framework for what we mean by responsible business. And now, then what's happened now, the next phase we're in is, since that 40 companies got up and running, we now have over 10,000 companies working together to make progress against the goals. We're in 160 countries around the world, so wherever you are, you'll be able to work and partner with other organizations doing the same thing. But now, the issue that we're facing is, and let's have the next slide, Lauren. The issue is, it's not enough for organizations to be simply working responsibly. We need to make some really bold, ambitious goals and targets internally in order that we can meet these sustainable development goals. For us to create the world that we all want, which is best defined by the goals and targets in the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to really step up with some very ambitious goals and some detailed plans that we can scale around the world to help deliver them. So we're looking to work with yourselves, the Responsible Jewellery Council, to really scale up the kind of activity in the private sector that will help us deliver those goals, which is indeed why we have this partnership. We're really delighted to have joined up with the Responsible Jewellery Council, and we really would like to use this partnership to engage as many members in creating, through the Code of Practices of the Responsible Jewellery Council, organizations that align to the 10 principles and collectively work towards delivering the goals. We hope to do this by providing tools and resources for all of you organizations in the council, so that you can set up and meet ambitious corporate targets that align to the world's needs. This is critical because we know a lot of organizations are engaged, taking action, but not enough are setting goals that really align to what the world needs. And we'll come to that a little bit later when we talk about the specifics of gender. The second thing we're hoping to help you with is content, case studies that will help you understand what companies do, what's working, and see how we can help you through that program. So, brings me to the next stage. The next slide is what we're doing today. We're focusing on gender, as you'll know. And why is that? Well, I think it's quite clear to many of you why. It was an International Women's Day on March the 8th, always is, and there's a lot of focus on the progress that's been made, or the lack of, in terms of delivering equality, both in the private sector and in the world for women. Also, every time, at the same time, we have the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW. That is 25 years ago we launched this initiative. It was launched in Beijing, and it brings together member states, NGOs, experts to address the issue of inequality for women. And 10 years ago, we introduced what you see here on the right-hand side, the Women's Empowerment Principles. And that was essentially bringing the private sector into this multi-sectoral initiative, looking at the Commission of Status of Women. So 10 years ago, we brought in the Women's Empowerment Principles, and these are 7 principles which, if acted upon, if targeted and progressed within an organization, can deliver gender equality in a business. So therefore, the private sector has a clear role articulated and designed and defined within this journey. I'll come to this in a little bit later. So what are we going to do on this webinar in specific terms? See the next slide? We need to tackle this question. We've been working on this for 25 years at least, and I know the business community has been working on this for a substantial amount of time. But we're still not making the progress we need. In fact, it's still going to take 257 years to close the economic gender gap, and that's actually getting worse. I can give loads of different statistics and data on here, but I've just put a handful of them. We know that women take home 1/10 of the global income, but do 2/3 of the global work. So the gender pay gap is still a real issue. We have 15% of board seats and 4% of CEO and chair positions. Senior level representation is still not high enough. Less than 30 companies have time-bound measurable goals that target gender and targets in their gender strategy. We know that companies who are actually working using our gender gap analysis tool are taking action, they've got projects, but not enough of them have goals that are really time-bound and aligned to the needs of society. So that's really what we want to focus on now. In terms of what should we be doing. You see the next slide? what is it that a company should do? And we have 4 overall guidances that organizations should take set before they get going. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of detail about how these have come alive in one of the organizations that we work with. The first thing is it's really all about setting the right goals, the right targets, and to scale these in all departments, all functions, all parts of the organization. So the first thing to do is to sign these women's empowerment principles. That brings, I'll come into that in a little bit more detail, but it puts you in a group of organizations like-minded working against the same challenge. The second thing is how do you work out what really needs to be done? We have a tool, the Gender Gap Analysis tool. It's a self-assessment online tool. You go in confidentially, answer a set of questions, and it gives you an understanding and a rating as to where your organization stands in terms of gender equality, and identifies the areas where you need to target and where you need to make progress. In order then to make progress, it's useful then to use any resources that you have available to help you. Other companies, supporting organizations, but we also have a lot of resources that can help you make your improvement towards reaching those goals. And also incidentally setting the relevant goals. And then lastly, if companies really need help, sort of hand-holding throughout this process, target setting plans, measuring progress, we have a Target Gender Equality Impact Initiative, which is much more like a sort of business accelerator program, and I'll go through that in a little bit of detail. So the next slide, the Women's Empowerment Principles. So this here is, I'm just going to summarize each of those points so you have a bit of an idea what I mean when I'm talking about it. These are the Women's Empowerment Principles. There are 7 of them, and they are exactly the principles that if you sign up to, along with the other 2,700 companies, you're able to set relevant goals, you're able to work with other organizations who are doing that, and it helps you really make progress. These are developed in partnership with UN Women, and we work together to help companies make progress. So the first one is making sure there's corporate leadership. That's absolutely primary and most important. All women need to be treated and men fairly at work, making sure that there's no discrimination. Thirdly, all health and safety and well-being across all men and women across all workers. Fourthly, promote education and training and development so that you can actually rapidly move people through the organization. You need to implement an enterprise development, supply chain, marketing practices that all empower women. So looking at communication as well as internal as well as external, along with the goal setting. And then promoting equality throughout all initiatives, including community initiatives, and advocating for that in the community so that the surrounding organization, the supply chain, and the communities in which you operate are also gender equal. And then seventhly, and most importantly, to track progress on this, on achieving gender equality. So that's what the principles are. And a lot of the further information that we have are ways to help people deliver against those. So the next slide. As I mentioned, the second point was we have this tool. This is on our website. Anyone can use it. It's a public good. Go on the tool. It's self-assessment. It's totally confidential. It gives you an understanding of it against a range of different items and processes as to where you stand in the area of gender equality. It will then give you a good analysis as to how you stand against other companies, and gives you a focus of where you should be focusing your target setting, your planning, and your goal setting as an organization. Next slide. The third thing I mentioned was tools and resources. We have a lot of tools and resources which we can help navigate. On the website, obviously we have the tool. We have a lot of gender-specific resources and help and support. We have the Academy. So any programs that are coming through on the Academy related to gender, this helps people. How do you address the gender gap, pay gap, looking at harassment, looking at child-friendly policies. All these learning tools are best practice and usually has an organization case study, an expert from a business actually explaining how they did it in their way. So there's lots of tools that can help you make progress. And then the last point that I mentioned is when an organization really wants to go through the whole process in partnership with other like-minded organizations to get learning from them, to get experts and coaches to help them, we have this this initiative, which is, we call them global impact initiatives. We have them on a range of subjects, but gender is a top priority, which has just been launched. They will cover, first of all, tailored facilitation of that gender gap analysis tool. So you work together, coaches and experts help someone understand and analyze the outcome of the tool. We then have in-country interactive workshops, which are led by experts, and obviously peer-to-peer feedback with different organizations, and learning opportunities like an accelerator program, so that you can really understand how it's working, what works, what companies have found difficult, and what's working well. Integrated into that will be executive and expert roundtable discussions, where we can bring academia in, we can bring governments in, we can bring investors in to help them shape the whole agenda, help companies move forward, but also make sure that they're operating in an environment where this will function well. And then lastly, we will follow that with an overall campaign showing the progress that these organizations have made and emphasizing how beneficial that is and bringing that to the world at large. We've got 24 countries doing that at the moment, but it will be an ongoing program going from year to year. So those are all the things that we would suggest a company does, and how we can help them go through that program. The last thing I'd like to just show is a bit of a case study on Unilever, who I'm sure many of you will have seen have just achieved gender balance in 2020. They set up the target of 50-50 in 2020, and they have indeed achieved it. In fact, they've said they need to go backwards because they've actually achieved 51% women in the organization. They still have some way to go on the executive board. The chair board is over 50-50, but the executive team still have to get to 50-50, and the layer just below. So it's still got work to go, but the whole organization is 50-50, and it's an amazing achievement. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about how they did that. And first of all, you can see on the left-hand side here, there is the hard stuff, the tough, the sort of fixed process things that they put in place, and then also the cultural changes that they made. So looking at what we're calling the hard stuff, they've essentially set this extremely ambitious target that they were at 40%, well, 38% in 2010, and in 10 years they wanted to get to 50. So they started with mindful target setting, and this is quite important. It was detailed quantitative modeling, targets applied on data, based on data and current and historical challenges, to make sure there were stretching targets for every market, every function, every factory, every organization, right through the organization, looking at the inflows, the outflows, and also the qualitative data to require them to make these very detailed targets. These targets were tracked by the Unilever executive monthly, and they set up a global diversity board to review the whole thing 3 times a year to ensure that they were on track. So you see here, empowerment principle 1 and 7, right at the beginning, kicked off. Next thing is they focused on hotspots, and they identified a couple of areas which had typically been more male dominated than others. In supply chain, for example, there was a plan to increase representation of women in the function. A lot of the factories in lots of countries had very low representation of women, and they pushed that through. They developed existing female leaders. They worked with recruitment specialists to build a proactive talent pipeline to make sure that they did that. And they set up a supply chain female mentoring program. So again, you see the principle number 4 in action. They put in policies to support balanced internal promotions and external hiring and unbiased assessment of senior leadership. And you'll see women's principle number 2 in action. Female representation at the vice president level moved from 70% in 2015 to 30% in 2018. So that was a dramatic change. And in similar processes, the finance organization, they also adopted a performance management framework for gender representation, giving targets to directors for leadership position appointments. The next thing they did in this whole area of setting or providing data it was interesting, is they gave everyone a gender appointment ratio. All senior leaders had a measure given that was tracked over a 5-year period, which is the ratio of men to women that they had appointments that they had made in senior positions. So it wasn't necessarily a target, but over time you could see if anyone was absolutely not making 50-50 of their appointments, or maybe more. Now, that's because at many times there's maybe unconscious bias going on. There's lots of reasons why you can't appoint someone, but actually if you track that over a 5-year period, you realize that there is no excuse and we should actually be making some progress. So that really helped. That gave managers a big picture of their recruitment decisions, improved their awareness, and it triggered conversations about the issue and helped them make unbiased choices when opportunity arrives. So the next thing on this was the gender inclusive programs and policies to help. The first thing they put in work is flexible work. Now, all employees in Unilever are now able to request flexible working. It's something that goes right through the business to all people have more control on how, when, where, and how they work. The first job share at the VP level is also functioning well, both for the business and also for the individuals. And it's role modeling the possibility that good business can go with people balancing careers, purpose, personal responsibilities. So that's working very well. There is new support for new parents. There was a rollout of a global maternal well-being standard for every single individual all through the organization, not just in different countries and different levels. It's uniform. In 54% of the countries that goes beyond the country regulation requirements. And obviously in other organizations where it's less, they're still able to take the country regulation. So it just got everybody in the whole organization to a good base. They're also recognizing the role of men as caretakers. The global paternity leave standard has been launched. It enables new fathers to take at least 3 weeks paid leave, paternity leave, and this is available to same-sex couples and those who choose to adopt. So again, processes and systems in place to allow people to transition at sort of heavy load times of their lives. And then the other thing they put in place, which you see the principle number 4 in place, is mentoring and training. All work level 3 and all work level 4 women went through a mentoring program and a women's leadership program to allow that progress to happen. So there were a lot of measures, policies, systems in place to make that happen, but Unilever will say that it's the soft stuff and the cultural stuff that really make it happen. And the first thing is the role modeling and communication. And as I said before, it's the principle number 1 that this needs to be led from above. Communication associated with new leadership, gender inclusive leadership, the behaviors, the communication, the ways of working that need to be modeled. Champions and individuals who build gender inclusive cultures, took paternity leave, etc., were promoted. In brand communication, how they joined the Unstereotype initiative, making sure that stereotypes in advertising were moving away from outdated, unhelpful, in some cases even harmful communication. And then turn that lens inwards into the organization to commission a study to see how stereotypes might be affecting their employees internally. That made some tough reading. 60% of women and 49% of men said that they felt that stereotypes were holding them back at work. They took swift action on that, and the unstereotype is now a theme internally across all staff in Unilever. So that shows the norms that people were facing. The next thing is on governance, which again is principle number 1 and is the most important. All of this achievement has been made possible because of the commitment of the Global Diversity Board, led by previously Paul Pullman and now by Alan Jope. So right at the top, it comprises senior leaders across the organisation and is accountable for setting these diversity and inclusion measures, the strategy, the plans, and acting as a catalyst. This board, the Global Diversity Board, are tasked with leading gender balance in their parts of the business and helping the organisation achieve targets. So I hope what you can see there is there's a very clear set of goals and actions that can take place. The Global Compact's here to help anyone do it, and we can give you practical advice and examples of how we know this happens day to day. So thank you very much. That's a little bit about our role in the partnership, and now on to Iris and what's happening in the RJC.
Thank you, Sue, for really setting the scene. And the RJC became member of the UN Global Compact in 2009 and is very proud of this leadership partnership on the SDGs. And we are humble because we do believe that we're on track. We'll maybe start by giving our participants today a quick snapshot about Responsible Jewellery Council. Next slide, please, Torn. The RJC is the leading global standards and certification organization for the jewelry and watch industry. And it was founded in 2005 by 14 inspiring members such as Cartier, De Beers, Signet, Tiffany, Dimexon, Rio Tinto, with a clear vision, a responsible worldwide supply chain that promotes trust and integrity in the global jewelry and watch industry. And over the last 15 years, our membership has grown to more than 1,200 member companies, spanning the entire supply chain from mine to retail and companies of all sizes. And as you can see on this slide, our RJC Code of Practices covers all the primary materials and precious metals that make jewelry. And I think that everyone on this call will agree that responsible business is good business. The certification process to the Code of Practices is a very practical way for our members to start their sustainability journey and contribute to the bigger agenda of the world, the 17 SDGs. And it is a journey of continuous improvement. The 10 principles of the UN Global Compact are embedded into our Code of Practices standards. And one point I would like to mention is that our new Code of Practices is aligned with OECD due diligence guidance for minerals and the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights. And this is fundamental, as we should never forget that women's rights are human rights. And that brings me, of course, to SDG 5, gender equality. And as Sue mentioned earlier, without transformative shifts, women will wait over 2 centuries to close the divide in the workplace. And I think that we all agree that that's not acceptable and that all industries have a responsibility to act. Next, please. So let us take a closer look at our supply chain. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Where are women in the supply chain? Well, women are present across the entire jewelry supply chain, from mining to cutting and polishing to manufacturing, designing, and retail. For example, women represent 30 to 40% of artisanal miners. Another example is in India, where a large number of women are employed in diamond cutting and polishing and jewelry manufacturing. A leading example is, for example, Botswana, where women represent 70 to 80% of the diamond cutters. And if we look at product manufacturing, women may represent from 40 to 90% of workers in jewelry factories, depending on the country context. And research reveals that in Italy, for example, the jewelry manufacturing workforce is about 40 to 50% women, while in some factories in Thailand, women represent up to 90% of the workers. So next, please. So, but what are some of the barriers that women face in the various parts of the supply chain? And let me share some examples of challenges that we have seen from the BSR report published in 2018 on women in the jewelry supply chain. And some of these barriers are common across the industry. And to start, women have limited representation in leadership and lack to access to decision-making roles. In mining, for example, while women hold 10% of management positions globally, which is still limited, they only represent 1% of top executive positions. The good news is that we see companies like De Beers, Rio Tinto, Lucara, Alrosa accelerating these efforts and are paving the way for women leadership. Additionally, women are frequently more present in lower skilled work and often in more vulnerable to poor working conditions and lower wages. And women are often limited to participate and grow into higher positions given their lower educational levels and skills. And for example, in the cutting and polishing industry in India and Sri Lanka, many men have learned and gained skills by watching their fathers and uncles and may have served as apprentices, cases that we rarely see for women and girls. Beyond the usual formal educational challenges, women also are often less exposed to informal on-the-job training, and that could provide more expert technical skills for them. We also see that in cutting and polishing, as well as manufacturing, the increase in the use of technology and shifting the required skills raises concerns given women often have lower skills and levels of education. And other specific challenges emerge, such as lack of access to finance, limited knowledge of opportunities, or limited support network. So next, please. So this is a slide that's quite personal to me. I've had the privilege to work for over 25 years in the jewelry, technology, and fashion industry, and I have encountered different challenges as a woman, but mostly I've experienced tremendous encouragement and support from many women and men I worked with who empowered me through learning opportunities on the job, expert guidance, knowledge sharing, and mentoring. And I do see this real movement happening in our industry. Women are changing the industry, and it's really about collective action on the ground now. We should not forget that women control 70 to 80% of all consumer spending through a combination of buying power and influence. And it is imperative that every organization in our industry starts looking at their impact through this gender lens. And the following presents the 8 building blocks here on this slide, identified really as the universal requirements for improving women's economic empowerment programs. And particularly to the jewelry industry, there are 6 of these 8 building blocks marked in green, which present both challenges but also opportunities of actions to advance women and hence promote gender equality. However, beyond these 8 pillars, we feel it's important to go back to our core values, that we all need to engage as individuals, as organizational members, and as well as part of the community and society. We believe that we need to have strong leadership with purpose, just as Sue started this introductory, by each one of us to really make SDG 5 a reality. Next, please. So how is the RJC leading the way in partnership with its members and key stakeholders? Well, first of all, through the implementation by our members of the COP, the Code of Practices, where gender is fully integrated. Secondly, by starting to measure impacts and data. Important to mention, we're launching an SDG task force that includes SDG 5 impact measurement, and we welcome participants to this platform, and the terms of reference will be shared soon. And finally, we will continue to accelerate partnerships. This is our mantra. The only way forward is collaboration and championing best practices through education and knowledge sharing. We will enhance capabilities and accelerate our engagement with organizations such as BGOP, the Major French Jewelry and Watch Association, the International Colored Gemstones Association, the Diamond Producers Association, CIPJO, Antwerp World Diamond Center, the World Gold Council, the World Diamond Council, Jewelers of America, Jewelers Vigilance Committee, the Plum Club, and so many other key stakeholders. And of course, this close relationship with the UN Global Compact and also the OECD reflects this vision of cooperation. Next, please. As we dive a bit deeper into the Code of Practices, it has a gender lens to various provisions, some which directly address gender equality, such as non-discrimination or the suggestions we have put forward for community development, and others that may not be necessarily so obvious as to why women are in more vulnerable situations, such as working hours, where we call out the right to paid maternity leave, and of course, flexible working hours and arrangements. Next. There are many ways to address gender equality, and building on from BSR's framework for action, we want to really put forward pillars for you to think about for any organization around the type of role that your company can play to advance gender equality. Companies can act. Companies should think beyond compliance. Companies can enable other stakeholders, such as NGOs, business partners, to really deepen and expand programs on the ground. Companies can advocate shared learnings and experience. And we believe as RJC that all these actions will contribute to the building and strengthening of transformative partnerships. And no matter where you are in the supply chain or where a company is or the scale or the size or the location, every company is accountable and every company can do something to promote gender equality. Next, please. So now we move to some practical examples from leading RJC member companies. And let me start with one of our founding members, De Beers. De Beers is a mining company and has a vision to create a workforce with equal gender representation, as well as equal access to opportunity for women and girls in their host communities and producer companies. And De Beers approaches it 2 ways. Internally first, De Beers has committed to a diverse gender-balanced workforce. the commitment of parity between 40–60% continues in 2020. To do this, alongside the implementation of employee networks, reciprocal mentoring programs and recruitment guidelines, the Beurs is now looking at how we can challenge stereotypes and really create culture change, for example, by engaging men across the group and rolling out inclusive leadership training. Externally, the Beurs is promoting and supporting women micro-entrepreneurs through mentoring, networks, business and life skills training. Through the Accelerating Women-Owned Enterprises program, run in partnership with UN Women and local governments, they aim to support at least 1,250 women micro-entrepreneurs across Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa by 2020. And the programs provide mentoring, networks, business and life skills training, which will in turn create new jobs, regular wages, and a wider range of businesses to really help communities thrive. The program has so far trained more than 50 local people to become trainers and supported over 850 women micro-entrepreneurs in Namibia and South Africa. Next. Another good example is Makal, recently joined RJC in 2019 and is working towards certification. The founder and CEO, Daniela Kolakiova, developed different programs and ways to advance women's opportunities in the mining sector based on her mining background and the fact that women and children are the most vulnerable groups in informal mining, but also the willingness of women miners to become independent and run their own business. Her purpose is to making mining a positive force for community development, especially for women in the informal sector. And what is her approach? Well, supporting women to really become part of the formal structure, acting as a link with the authorities, helping them obtain licenses and required authorizations to operate, providing training and support, but also helping the women really organize themselves and operate in a structured way, help them form into independent cooperatives of women run by women, and preparing women to develop and become responsible entrepreneurs, teaching them really basic skills required, raising their awareness to risks of operating illegally and informally and being potentially abused. Next. The next example is another founding member, Dimexon, a diamond trader cutter polisher operation. Dimexon has centered many of their actions to advance women by creating employment opportunities. And this is a great example of a family business taking the lead on scaling up the gender balance. The action started as the founder, Mr. Pankaj Mehta, returned to his hometown in India with the aim to hire people from the local communities. And the company has gone beyond recruitment to ensure continuous development of women through upskilling and career advancement programs and retention. They also work to enable safe working environments, both regarding health and safety, but also by addressing and eliminating violence and harassment. And the value of such intentional actions to the company include talent retention. Next. The next example is Days Jewelers, an American jewelry and watch retailer that has been a dedicated RJC certified member since 2007. They not only focus on internal actions related to its policies and business practices, 59% of its management staff are women, they also support other actors and charities focused on accelerating women's empowerment through their activities and programs. Their approach to gender equality and, for example, analysis and review of their gender pay gap is very interesting because it's truly led by senior management. And that is the leadership with purpose model I referred to earlier. Their gender pay gap review panel includes the company president and senior executives, evidence that there's a really strong internal buy-in for gender equality from the top. They have also gone as far as engaging an outside firm to conduct a compensation analysis of their employees' wages and salaries. And they're constantly evaluating gender ratios into their leadership positions to ensure equal opportunities are provided to women who seek to be engaged in leadership roles. Next, Bulgari, member since 2006, part of LVMH, has developed several programs to promote and achieve more diverse and gender-balanced workforces and leadership teams. And a few of the actions they have put forward to drive gender equality throughout the entire employment cycle include setting women in leadership goals to really ensure there's a clear vision as to where the company is going and aim to, launching a program for professional development of women at all levels and positions through training, coaching, and gender diversity programs to also make sure women are equipped to grow internally. And third, conducting workshops to sensitize recruitment teams and new collaborators on diversity and inclusion, which is essential as frequently these processes may be biased. And recruitment is key as it's the first stage of the employment cycle. If gender biases exist there, this will impact the rest of the workforce pipeline and probably the organizational culture. And the final case study next we would like to share is Fairtrade Jewellery, that has also taken action both internally as well as externally. Given the company has a 90% women workforce, and they believe that since the industry caters predominantly to women, it is essential that women are part of the decision makers within their company, a strategy that has strengthened their business model. And they also aim to maintain as flat an organization as possible to ensure participation and inspire the confidence for staff to speak up. Additionally, the company sources responsible ASM gold through Impact's Just Gold program, which sources responsible conflict-free from the DRC. And Impact's program conducts skills building and training for women in the mining communities. And the results of these activities include increased literacy, which means that women are empowered to access mine sites to mine them, whereas previously they held peripheral jobs. Women are now more knowledgeable about how to trade the gold they mine and have greater decision-making power in their households. And this all leads to greater female economic empowerment and leadership. Next, please. Participants of this conference call, I think companies in the jewelry industry, we can agree that both upstream and downstream in the supply chain, we have different opportunities to engage and support gender equality and advance women empowerment. And we do understand that each company is at different stages in addressing and advancing women's opportunities, and that actions need to be tailored, but there are a few thoughts we'd like to leave with you as potential actions. Commit to gender equality. Indeed, become a signatory of the Women Empowerment Principles and work together with the RJC to implement. Raise internal awareness with leadership and management. Review your code of conduct and processes. Conduct gender-sensitive trainings. Engage and support further and new research at the different stages of the supply chain to really uncover context-specific gender challenges to design solutions that will enable and advance women in the jewelry supply chain. And just share your experiences and learnings. And to conclude, I think it's really important that companies focus on gender equality, not only in their own companies, but in society and in their supply chains, because ultimately that is what will really drive economic opportunities. So I think this is a great momentum to act between the RJC and the UN Global Compact. I also believe it's a moral responsibility to drive SDG 5 gender equality forward. And I would like to thank you again for participating, and please connect with us to share your stories and experiences. We have a great team of experts in London, in Geneva, in USA, in India, and the team is ready to support you in this amazing journey. And I think I would like to give the floor then back to Sue.
I think someone keeps unmuting me. Okay. Hi. So thanks very much, Iris. And I'm really sorry we had a couple of glitches on the system. I think it's because everybody is using the Zoom account because of the distance working policy because of the virus. I'm going to go very, very quickly now just to some of the questions that we have. But first to say, we will respond if you've asked us any questions and you leave a name, we don't have any time to respond to that. The first one I hear here is, are time-bound targets relevant in every scenario? And how do we do that if it's a small group and you can't increase the number of the group? Well, I think the answer to that is yes, of course it's relevant. If we want to get to 50, we can get there. The question is time. So you set a goal when that can be achieved. And then the question is how. It will be thinking about the time when members of the committee might be changed. You have to make sure that the appointments to the changed environment, to the new appointees, needs to be moving towards a gender balance. Looking at the pipeline of people who you're looking to bring onto the committee, you need to make sure that that is going to help the gender balance. You need to look at people on the committee at the moment. Are there gender bias issues, etc., etc. It's really about setting it over time, because no organisation, however big or however small, can make it quickly over time. But you can make these changes immediately. So you have to set a time and bring new people in over that programme. The second question I have here is the gender gap analysis tool available on the Responsible Jewellery Council site? It's a UN tool, so it's available on the UN Women's site, and it's available through the UN Global Compact site. It has to be done that way. The analytics are in that way. So but it's open to everyone. You can get on our site and you can get the link. Next question I have here is, how does one track progress against the SDGs? How do we do that? That's a slightly long answer, but I'll try and give a quick answer right now. The first thing to do is to look at all the goals that are, and understand where an organisation is having a material impact, either positive or negative, on those goals. Then you need to work out what are the indicators that you want to track. Now, there's two ways to do that. One is we do have an analysis of all the goals and targets. So every single indicator that has been developed is documented behind all the targets and all the goals. That's on our site. It's analysis, goals and targets. However, that's a monumental piece of work that needs to be done. The other solution I would suggest is to access the SDG Action Manager, which is a Sustainable Development Goals self-assessment tool. It's similar to the gender gap analysis tool, but it goes across all SDGs and it's less depth on gender, obviously. It's aligned to the B Corp BLAC assessment tool. So you're basically doing the questions that get done that B Corp companies do, but going through the lens of the principles and the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's a good tool. It gives you an analysis of where you are, and then starts to give you, then you have an ideas of where should I be setting targets, how could I make progress. Then once you've set those targets, you then need to have time-bound tracking against those. We will be upgrading our facility and our communication on progress to enable that, but at the moment I think most organizations are doing that themselves. And then the fourth question that I have here is, how do we get better transparency in the supply chain of gems and jewelry? We have a transparency and responsible procurement toolkit, but I think given that this is a specific question about gems and jewelry, I think, Iris, it would be a good idea to answer that.
Well, first of all, there are indeed many tools available, and the RGC is working on different toolkits to help, members to drive. First of all, to understand indeed what the SDGs are. Second, how the contribution to the code of practices really helps them in that journey to the SDGs. And also the work that we will do with the SDG task force will represent different parts of the supply chain. So I'm happy to take that question offline and already share some of the information we have, and then hopefully that company is also interested to participate in the SDG task force. Any other question?
There's one more question. Does the RJC support direct economic empowerment projects, for instance? Does it help upskilling women gemstone and gold miners?
Well, the RJC will do that through their members. So we have, different members within our group of 1,200 member companies who will have individual programs. And I think it will be interesting also after this webinar to see, what kind of information, best practices we can share.
Great. I think the other questions are all to do with, can we share links on the tools? Could we share the slides? And of course, all of that we've talked about, we're very happy to forward to all participants on the webinar today.
Yes, so and maybe I would like to make one comment because all the RJC members had received at the occasion of International Women's Day a special brief, and the WEBS tool is also in that brief and other relevant tools. But we're happy to reshare all that information to the participants.
Great. Well, that's great. Thank you very, very much, everyone. I think despite a few glitches in our webinar system, I think we've covered quite a lot of information. And as I say, always happy to respond to any further questions. Either Iris or myself are here to help and support anyone to help make this progress.
Thank you, Sue. And maybe as a final comment, because we have many members on the line, I would like to thank them for their support. I think it's very exciting. We're working together on the broader agenda of 2030. And I also would like to take the opportunity to thank my amazing team all over the world for their great work and their purpose and their commitment to the organization. So I know some of them are on the line. We have Kinjal in India and Brandy in the US and all the team in London. So this is an exciting journey ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone.